So the first question I often get asked is, why do I need a speech therapist? I can talk just fine. Well, as a speech therapist, I work on a whole lot more than just speech. So generally, I come back to you with some questions to help me understand, why do you need a speech therapist? So I might ask you some things such as, do you ever notice that you cough on food or liquid? Do you have any trouble swallowing your pills? Any difficulty managing your saliva or possibly even drooling? Well, what we know is that people with Parkinson's have reduced strength and coordination in all of the swallow mechanism, from the mouth all the way down through the throat and into the esophagus. So, what I want to point out is that you are not likely producing more saliva, but instead, you're just not taking those automatic swallows throughout the day in order to manage your saliva. And because of these things, the weakness and the lack of the presence of a really good swallow, you may be at higher risk for what we call aspiration and aspiration pneumonia. Aspiration is when food or liquid or saliva goes into the lungs instead of into the stomach. So as a speech therapist, what will I do? I'll work to strengthen that whole swallow mechanism. That's first and foremost. I want you to be able to eat what you want to eat. Eating should be enjoyable. Now, that's going to require some assessment in order to determine what particular parts of the swallow aren't functioning well for you. So sometimes you may need to do an x-ray of your swallow in order to really determine what's going on there. So once we determine what's going on, then we'll work on exercises to strengthen that swallow, or we may need to develop some compensatory strategies, or maybe even change some of the textures that you eat or the consistency of the liquids that you drink. That's less common, but it may be necessary. All right, here's my next question for you. Do people often ask you to repeat yourself? How often do you hear, "What was that?" or "Come again?" It's likely pretty common. It's likely that your speech isn't really as loud as you think it is. You may feel like you're talking at a perfectly normal loudness, but in fact, you're much quieter than normal. What I do in therapy is I'll have a little sound level meter, shows how loud you are. And you'll be watching me talk, and then you'll be talking on it, and you'll think, oh, I'm up there, I'm pretty close to Kathleen. I'm doing pretty good. Well, what you don't realize is 3 or 4 decibels, it makes an amazing difference in how loud you are. So then I'll try to imitate how loud you are, and I'll try to go and talk at that level of decibels that I'm hearing you talk at. And you'll likely be very surprised, and often I have a hard time even being that soft. So once we get you convinced that, oh my goodness, I really am soft, now we're going to work on making you louder. The other thing we'll really focus on is making your voice interesting again. With Parkinson's, you'll often start to kind of talk at the very same cadence all the time and not use good inflection and pausing and do those things that really make your speech sound interesting. Using those strategies also helps people to know what you're saying. It gives importance to what you're saying. So we work on that. All right, you ready for my next question? Do you ever have difficulty saying what's on your mind? You may have difficulty thinking of words. You may have trouble maintaining your train of thought. or taking that thought and then putting it into words. We know you're having great thoughts. We want to hear them. So once I delve in and understand what the problem is, then we work on improving those skills and developing strategies to compensate for whatever difficulty it is that you may be having. Just understanding the difficulties and having some strategies can really reduce any stress that you're having around having conversations with people. All right, now finally, I may ask a whole variety of probing questions, and they may go something like this. Do you ever wonder how your brain's working for you? Do you feel like you're losing your thinking skills? Any trouble starting an action? Or any difficulty doing the necessary steps that you need to do to get the job done? Or is it difficult to remember things that have just recently happened? Well, all of these things fall under the topic of this great big word called cognition. It's the process of knowing, thinking, learning, understanding, and reasoning. Now in Parkinson's, we'll notice things might be going really well, but they're just slower in happening. Also, we will often find difficulties in an area that we call executive functions. All right, what are executive functions? Well, here's some examples. You may have trouble just starting an activity, or what we call initiating an action. On the other hand, you may jump right in without planning out what's the best approach to do that action. Now that requires problem solving, another part of executive functions. You got to think about what's the best and safest way for me to proceed with this. Now, once you get going, you may have trouble stopping what you're doing. You may fail to actively analyze what it is that you're doing and say to yourself and recognize, wait a minute, that's not what I'm wanting to do. I need to stop, I need to fix this, and I need to make this better. And I'll just briefly mention multitasking, doing more than one thing at a time. Well, let's admit it, that's just mind-blowing. So in therapy, we often incorporate multitasking because it's real life, but I also want to make you aware that doing one thing at a time is going to be your friend. So cognition is this big, messy ball of twine that can really get tangled up at times. What do I do as a speech therapist? Well, I'll assess your cognition to figure out what your strengths are, because we know you have some wonderful strengths, but we'll also be able to identify what are your limitations. Once we understand how your brain's working for you, in therapy we'll work to retrain those abilities, maybe to find other ways of doing these things, or find ways to compensate in order to get these jobs done. It's important to involve the people in your life in this therapy. You know, it's important for them to learn strategies to be able to help you. But it's also just as important to train the people around you on what are unrealistic expectations. What can we just not expect that you're going to be able to do on your own anymore? And let's set up your world for success. So this area of cognition can sometimes be a bit of a scary world to enter into, but it shouldn't be. I want you to be aware that we as speech therapists know that you haven't lost any of your intelligence, and in fact, we don't even assess intelligence. Simply put, as a speech therapist, I'm here to help you be the best person you can be. So, I hope that through this, you gain some understanding of what I do as a speech therapist. I often tell my patients I work from here on up. Don't be asking me about all that stuff that goes on down there. I'll help you to understand about your swallowing, having an audible voice, being able to speak and express yourself, and then we'll also delve into this whole big old world of cognition that's going on up here. So I hope that you will seek out a speech therapist to be a member of your team. We work on a whole lot more than just speech. You'll likely be surprised by the multitude of ways in which we can be of help. So good luck in your search, and thanks for listening.